that led him to us this morning. And so, Dr. Marbury, let's see if we might be able to pick up where we left off and to have you to start talking about African Americans and the institutional church from your perspective.
Well, I think what's foundational for the institutional church for African Americans, and perhaps foundational for most churches, but particularly for black churches, is the Bible. You find it in the pulpits. We preach from it. It is our authority for our moral life, and it is for most Christian communities the Word of God. And I tell my students every time they step into a pulpit in the midst of a community of believers and they speak from the Bible, they are speaking for that community. What is the Word of God? And so one of the things that captured my attention when I was a student at ITC and then later at Vanderbilt, I had good professors like Professor Victor Anderson and Professor Lewis Baldwin, who interest me not only in ethics, that is how black communities think about what's right and wrong, but also interested me in the history of the black church. And from that standpoint, I wanted to know, well, why do black churches, why do churches in general think of the Bible and use the Bible so differently? For example, you look in Nashville and you've got churches from one end of the city to the other. And on fundamental issues, we disagree, and yet the same book is being preached from our pulpits. And I began to wonder, well, what's going on? It's not the book is the same. What's going on in the way that we interpret these texts?
It's the interpretation of
Absolutely,
the
it's the way. And so I wanted to study how African Americans historically have interpreted the Bible. And so that's the reason I wrote Pillars of Cloud and Fire. It begins to look at African American biblical interpretation from the antebellum period, starting with slavery. And I look at various examples. A radical example and a conservative example in the antebellum period, beginning with Absalom Jones and David Walker. I move on to look at Reconstruction with Frances Ellen Watkins Harper and John Jasper. The Harlem Renaissance with Zora Neale Hurston. Then the era of civil rights with Adam Clayton Powell and Martin Luther King Jr. And finally, I look at the era of Black Power with Albert Clegg. Each one takes up the book of Exodus, but takes it up in a very different way. And they take it up based on what I talked about earlier. That is, what are the relevant challenges that my community faces? How can I continue to make the Word of God, the Bible, relevant? And so during the antebellum period, Absalom Jones and David Walker both take up the story of Exodus almost literally. That if God delivered the children of Israel from Egypt, across the Red Sea into the Promised Land, then God will do the same. And the Promised Land was freedom from slavery. Well, freedom from slavery came, and we weren't free. We faced Jim Crow and segregation. And so if you go to the era of Reconstruction, and you look at sermons, the Promised Land doesn't look like freedom from slavery. Emancipation is no longer identified with the Promised Land. Uplift